Hello everybody, my name is Brooklyn, otherwise known as the Dramatic Otaku, and welcome to the September-October Weeb wrap-up. And before you comment, this is in fact my September outfit. You'll see what my October outfit is. I haven't thought of it yet, but if you do not know what the Weeb wrap-up is, it is my bi-monthly series of me talking about all of the anime and manga that I have read and watched over the last 2 months. This obviously being for September and October, and seeing as I am doing a little special surprise for October, I will be doing this a little differently to my usual Weeb wrap-ups, in which I will be talking about them by month rather than by category. We can start with September, with September anime, except it wasn't anime, I only watched one thing and it was a live action. Now, what you're probably expecting me to say is the One Piece live action. No, I'm still watching that. No, instead we're going to be talking about the My Love Mix-Up one action. That is what I watched for my anime of this month. If you do not know, My Love Mix-Up is one of my favorite romance series at the moment. It is the story of Aoki and Ida, and how Ida thinks Aoki has a crush on him when Aoki actually has a crush on another person, a girl named Hashimoto, and Hashimoto has a crush on Aoki's friend Ida, but Aoki thinks that Hashimoto has a crush on Ida, and thus My Love Mix-Up. It's weird, but I love it, and when I found out there was a live action, I had to fucking watch it. So, reading glasses the fuck on, otherwise I will not be able to read. So just before we begin, this is all notes that I took in the series, simply because I forgot to do a summary, so I'll do a mini summary at the end, but we're just sort of going to go through my notes that I took as the episodes went on. Pretty much up until the camping trip arc, everything is exactly like the manga, while cutting out some settings and characters. So in the actual manga itself, I also pretty much held these as I was like watching the series, but the first volume, word for word, page for page on the live action. But for the live action, they've cut out a lot of settings. So like Ida and Aoki in front of a konbini, Ida and Aoki going into Tokyo and having a little date. Instead, now that's at the school. They're doing a little date at the school. They're having a little lunch date at the school. Or if they do have a date, it is completely different order. Pretty much up to volume 4 is exactly how it is put in the manga. However, the scenario of the camping trip in the manga, it is a skiing trip. In the live action, they instead just go to the mountains, and not even for a skiing trip, for a camping trip, for an orienteering trip, which they do kind of do in the manga, but it is just slightly different. So instead of a winter trip, they took a summer trip or summer camp into the mountains. The main setting is the school, and they added some extra drama into episode 6, where there's a love rival that wasn't really there before. The initial interaction was Ida and Aoki running into each other and settling it the next day on the roof, whereas here in the drama, which this is a drama, that is the word that was stuck on my fucking tongue. Here they settle it before a volleyball game, and the manager of the opposite team interrupts and is the love rival, or so we think. In true My Love Mix-Up fashion, Aoki thinks the girl likes Ida, and the girl actually likes the teacher of the volleyball team. So she's just an episodic threat, but helps push Ida into understanding why he likes Aoki. Now, she could technically be a substitute for Aoki's co-worker in one of the later volumes. However, I am almost certain that this series came out before like volume 5, I want to say. It's definitely came out before the series ended. Again, this is the plot of the manga, but formatted differently, and some of the events take place later in the series than they should. Also, I don't know if the series, like the actual like dub of the actual script, of the show took lines directly out of the manga, or whether the translators did and took the like official English translation of the manga and started putting that into the subtitles. But there were just some moments where I had one of these just like cracked open in front of me, and I was reading it and it lined up perfectly. I'm just like, you didn't. You did it. You did it. Ah! That I appreciated that a lot. I fucking love moments like that. As I said, some of the events are out of place slightly in terms of conversations and places, with most of the action being relegated to the school when some scenes take place otherwise. They also insert Aoki weirdly in some places where he does not need to be, such as Ida and Hashimoto's confession. Especially when they're outside of the hair salon. In the manga, Aoki isn't there, and he's just like weirdly there in that scene, and then he's also not there afterwards. It's really strange. Also, this also applies to Aoki's tutor. Instead of being a college student tutor at a cram school, he ends up being a teaching assistant and appears in one episode and one episode alone. So, don't know why. I'm assuming this was like a small budget drama instead of like a big budget drama like The Wallflower. That one is definitely a bigger budget drama. So this series has about 10 episodes. It took 7 episodes to get through the first 3 volumes. And in episode 8, we just skip straight to volume 5 for no reason. Now, we do travel back a bit in a later portion of the episode, but still, you skipped a whole volume. Don't think I didn't notice. Episode 9 is an altered version of both the Valentine's chapters in Volume 5 and the Christmas chapters in Volume 4. It's the Valentine's chapters, but recontextualized to Christmas with a plot point from Volume 6. The date felt so real, and this is the date that Aoki is supposed to have in the first volume with Ida, or the second volume. The first date he has with Ida, that is what this date is supposed to be like, and it felt so real. Now, I think the reason it felt real is because the actors weren't acting, they were just having a fun little time and just being filmed. And that's why it felt so real. I honestly love that, but it felt a little bit parasocial, I'm not gonna lie. And then, also in episode 9, after the date from volume 1 or 2, they take then from volume 3. Episode 9 is just like half the series in one shot. And like, it works. It surprisingly works really well in the favor of the series. I'm assuming because of the runtime, they wanted the main story from the first 3 volumes, but they knew if they set up certain plot points in chronological order, it would set up for later points of the series for a runtime that they did not have. That is my assumption, and I do appreciate it, but yeah. Now, episode 10. Of course, to finish off this drama, they had to have Ida and Aoki confess. So, they obviously did not take from the actual series in where like Aoki and Ida are dating half the time and like get close and very romantic and blah blah blah. No, in this version, Aoki and Ida are pretty much themselves from volume 4 or 5 for most of it. Just with events that happen at different points in the manga. And obviously, so the showrunners had to sort of make up how they were going to confess to each other and their ending. So one thing that I didn't expect was Ida's volleyball friends knowing that Ida and Aoki were a pair pretty much the entire time, and the fact that they like actually saw Ida and Aoki on their date. That was some drama that I fucking adored, and also didn't see fucking coming. The breakup plotline is the same from when it was in volume 4, but it is once again played out completely differently than volume 4 did it. So this is my little summary of opinions. So first of all, they picked the actors so well. I think the only actor that I'm sort of iffy on is Ida's actor, just because I feel like he's not like, he doesn't express Ida or do Ida as much of a justice as Ida probably should have, because like while Ida is sort of like plain face, he's still quite like, he has moments of like cuteness and being jolly and all that sort of shit. So this actor didn't necessarily have that half the time, but also he played Ida really, really well. In terms of like actual like acting, I thought he was pretty on point for Ida. Visually, I thought he was pretty on point. It was just like he needed an extra level. Aoki's actor was picked spectacularly. Also Hashimoto's actor was also fucking fantastic. I think Ida's was pretty good as well. When I was actually reading the manga, I had noted that Aoki changed when he got a job and he took his relationship with Ida seriously. So this entire drama, we just saw pre that, which did annoy me, because if you remember, I found pre like getting it together Aoki annoying. I found him actually quite annoying. Now the actor himself actually like lowered the blow for me in terms of how annoying Aoki can be as a character, and he actually turned that into a lot of humor, but he was still there, and we didn't get to see like put together Aoki all that often, and especially with Aoki being put into these weird scenarios, it's like, well, why did you do that? What was the reason? What was the reason? I do think that comparatively this series is very bare bones as compared to the actual manga itself. I really feel like if My Love Mix-Up was adapted into an anime, it would really, really flourish. But as a drama, it was pretty good. I thought episode 10 was fantastic because that's when the series sort of did its own thing, because it needed to conclude the series within 10 episodes. So I thought it was really good. It did its job well, and episode 10 honestly was pretty fantastic for me. I love Ida's like sudden passion for Aoki in the end, but I will say that having just the events of like the first 4 to 5 volumes be in this series, it kind of made Ida's sudden switch up a little weird, and that's what a lot of these series tend to do, anime or like dramas. If they're only taking from a couple episodes and then have to end, the last 2 episodes end up being like really fucking good, but the rest of the series is just kind of shit. I'm not saying this is shit, it's based off of one of my favorite manga at the moment, and it's pretty good. I liked the way that they rearranged some of the scenes, and I like how they didn't outright erase scenes, they just reworked them to fit certain settings, and I really appreciated that, because in some lower budget dramas they tend to just erase scenes because they can't like have it in this setting. I liked that they were able to move it around, but it was kind of obvious that they did that they made sure to keep all of the scenes in one setting, that being at the school. It did kind of take away from the closeness of Ida and Aoki's relationship, because you do get to see them outside a lot in this series, and that is what brings them closer, and that is like what makes them seem more like a couple instead of just like a weird high school relationship. But yeah, that is quite literally all that I really watched in September. Moving on to September manga. So I bought a fair amount of manga this month, and I keep fucking buying it. I did a bad thing, and I was having a very bad day because I had to work. I was also feeling violently ill. So what did I do to make myself feel better? I bought manga. Right after the fact that I had bought this manga and not read it at the time, and the comics, hadn't read those, still haven't read Assassination Classroom yet, but what did I do? I bought these. I then later also bought Volume 6 of Urusei Yatsura. We won't be talking about Volume 6 in this particular segment, mainly because I was going to get out Volume 5, but as I just said, it is pinned at the back of that pigeonhole. So for a representative in place of Volume 5, we have Volume 6. But I bought this, haven't read it yet. I've also since bought Volume 8 of My Love Mix-Up, pre-ordered that, still waiting for it to ship. I also bought more manga off of eBay. Oh, there's also more on the floor. There's so many down there. September manga. Okay, so yeah, I did the bad thing, bought manga. And because I was sick and had to wait like 5 hours between shifts, I read all of these in one sitting. And I started with 2226 just because this was short stories, they're really easily digestible, and I was having tummy problems, so I needed something very easily digestible. A couple months ago I reviewed 1721 a couple months ago, and I thought it was okay. I wasn't like a huge fan of it. One of the stories I kind of liked, but compared to like my Junji Ito, it wasn't the best. I have a much more positive opinion of 2226. I will be doing this over like per story, just because it is a short story collection. I'm just going to read out my mini opinion of my actual thoughts of the entire book as a whole. Overall, the stories in this set compared to 1721 are definitely higher quality, and I like that Fujimoto's shorts, you can see his thinking around Chainsaw Man. Now, so we're going to talk about all these shorts in this set. Let me just... Mermaid Rhapsody, Woke Up as a Girl Syndrome, Nayuta, The Prophecy, and Sisters. So starting with Mermaid Rhapsody. Actually a very romantic one-shot, very shoujo-esque, and similar to that of that one mermaid show that I've honestly forgot. It was one of my top rated anime last year. I cannot remember it for the life of me. I honestly love it. The story itself still had the Fujimoto flair of a tsundere character and a chick magnet, but still all around really well executed. Then is Woke Up as a Girl Syndrome. First of all, major trigger warning for this particular story is that there is heavy mentions of sexual assault within this one story in particular. I am not joking, it is weirdly present in this story. This is queer in the straightest way possible. Like, it's F to M, but the main character was assigned male at birth. It also talks about sex from a very straight perspective, like, no penis, no sex, but we'll have sex anyway. Weirdly straight. Anyway, it's so weirdly straight, but also vaguely queer. And obviously, with Fujimoto presenting as cishet, it does make sense as to why this is the vibe of said story, but still. Next is Nayuta the Prophecy. This feels like it was foretelling part 2 of Chainsaw Man, mainly because of Nayuta and her older brother Kenji. They live in the world where Nayuta being labelled as the catalyst for the end of the world, and her brother Kenji has to protect Nayuta from the world. Honestly, solid. It's a pretty good fucking story, and it does feel very reflective of Chainsaw Man, especially seeing as Fujimoto is the author of Chainsaw Man. Anyway, this is like how the vampire story in 1721 felt very reminiscent of Makima, whereas this is more reminiscent of Nayuta. Then finally is Sister. Weird. And also kind of incesty. Not a huge fan of it, to be quite honest. I thought the plot twist at the end of the older sister actually painting herself naked at the end of the day was pretty hilarious. I thought that gave me a good chuckle in the middle of a fucking food court. I really didn't like Sister. I really thought it was weird and incesty. But overall, 22-26, as I said, much higher quality stories as compared to 17-21, and I actually recommend this more than 17-21. Obviously, if you get triggered by sexual assault, I would not recommend it, but some of the stories are definitely solid and I really liked it. Next would be, as I mentioned, My Love Mix-Up, this being Volume 7. Now, I pre-ordered Volume 8, and I swear to God, if it doesn't come within the next week, I will cry. Honestly, this is so fun, as with the rest of the series thus far. This volume, Ida and Aoki think through their futures and take a trip to Kyoto to look at their options for uni. And surprise! A one-bed trope, you know, just one of the weirdest fucking tropes ever. It's fantastic. I love it. I kid, not really. There was an attempted one-bed trope, and then it didn't happen because the author is a coward. I really did love this volume. I do wish that Ida did have a quicker realization of his feelings in the series, but I guess we are sort of just like waiting on Ida throughout the entire series, whereas Aoki is the protagonist. So I also wish for this particular volume there was more plot, as there was only 3 full chapters, which I hate when there could be 4 full chapters instead of 3 chapters and a one-shot. And I believe this one also ended on a plot twist, or just like a thread of information that keeps you on your toes and wants you to buy the next one, which I get, marketing strategy, but also I want to read the next fucking book. Overall, I liked the chapters, and the Ida and Hashimoto one was actually quite funny, and I really liked how their relationship has progressed, especially seeing as they are the second couple in this book, and I'm not the biggest fan of their relationship overall, just because they seem more like plot points than like an actual relationship. But it was pretty funny for a couple that I don't particularly care about. Yeah, moving on to the next manga, which I have so many trigger warnings for this one, because I didn't expect this to be the way that it is. It's only 2 volumes, but it's like 2 volumes discontinued, and I only had volume 1, this being Not Your Idol. Now, trigger warnings for both volumes of this series as I talk about it. Trigger warning for assault, sexual assault, child sexual assault, heavy misogyny, victim blaming, and stalking. This is an idol manga, so think something similar to Oishinoko, stuff like that. Just think idol animes that talk about the behind the scenes of idols. This is pretty much that. Visually, first of all, in terms of the art style, there's a lot going on, and it was very hard to read. Being sick, I don't know if anyone else experiences this, but when I'm sick, if I have a lot of visual stimuli, I cannot concentrate. So having that much visual stimuli, I picked up the book and put it down about 4 times, then went to read 22-26, and then went to read My Love Mix-Up before actually feeling able to like pick this up. So the start of this is mainly just notes, so we're going to talk notes before I do my opinion blurb. So there is a lot of talk about not all men from this one pick-me-girl character, dealing with the trauma of the man, and women-only train cars. I have the note of what the fuck? The switch-up stalker romance question. This tries to do feminism and shows misogyny at full force, which I don't particularly want to see in my shoujo, especially when a lot of the misogyny is victim blaming. So, Volume 1 of Not Your Idol, also known as Sayonara Miniskirt, feels like a really weird version of the first episode of Oshi no Ko. Our protagonist, Nina, is a former idol who got attacked at a fan meet and got stabbed. She leaves her idol group, cuts her hair, no longer trusts men, and starts high school. May I add, I didn't write this down, but she's in a group where their whole premise is miniskirts, and it is the over-sexualization of idols, and particularly minors. Because she is, I believe, 16 or 17 in this volume. And the event that took place where she got stabbed had taken place 6 months earlier, meaning she was at minimum 15. And in volume 2, it shows depictions of her dressing in lingerie and stuff, which made me viscerally uncomfortable. That is something that I actually really dislike about this, is the over-sexualization of minors. It's that whole fallacy of like trying to show you the real world by doing the thing that you were trying to bring awareness to, if that makes sense. Like that whole piss poor excuse of the like director of Cuties trying to like show about the sexualization of children by sexualizing children. That is sort of the entire thing with this book. It's like trying to show you misogyny, rape culture, sexual assault, the sexualization of minors, all that sort of stuff, and then shows it all in these books. Which, like, it doesn't show it on a graphic scale, but it's still viscerally uncomfortable. When she starts high school, she meets Hikaru, the first man who she properly trusts since this event, 6 months after. However, it appears that Hikaru is her stalker and attacker. We find out this is false later, but by the way that the first volume ends, that is the opinion that we have. And she is in love with him. This is such a weird and dramatic story that had a switch up that I was not too hot on. The stalker romance is weird, but they also had a pick-me character who is very victim-blamey against women. To be honest, for the drama, I like it, and there's only 2 volumes, so for a spur-of-the-moment purchase, I was pleasantly surprised. Now, this is before I read Volume 2. I read Volume 2 online that night, and I have very differing opinions. I will say, my initial opinions of this volume, particularly, was very much the same as, like, where are you, bitch? Idle Dreams. It's very similar to Idle Dreams, in my opinion. If you smash Idle Dreams and Oshi no Ko together, you kind of get this, which it's not the best manga. It really isn't, but it's like so wildly dramatic that I sort of just go, interesting. It's like so messy, I had to read more. So we get into volume 2, which was online that I read this on. I wasn't a huge fan of this volume. Again, visually hard to read. I hated the sexualization of our protagonist as an idol who showed off her body, with the full context being that she was much younger when this happened. At minimum 6 months younger, which should still be under the age of 18, and potentially under the age of 16. There is a decent story for how pick-me girl type bullies are represented, and sexual assault, how it affects young girls, as well as the guilt you feel when a loved one is assaulted. But the way that it's done without any buffer, save from like Nina's best friends being like a breath of fresh air, it's way too much for 2 volumes, especially just the second volume. Especially when our pick-me can be a raging bitch and she had something awful happen to her. You end up feeling bad for her, even if she ends up like pretending that everything is fine, until she uses the fact that she was assaulted and that trauma to coerce somebody else. The male lead is whiny and pretty annoying, and the annoying character Miku, while I do feel this, if this series had continued, her character arc could have been great, which Miku is the pick-me girl bully character who had something awful happen to her. The weakness of our male lead, plus the lack of buffer between events, plus visual overstim, is all a little too much for me to handle and ends up ripping the story apart. The imagery of Miku lying there bruised and dirty is powerful as fuck, but the story could have made the next day in class feel a little less climactic and really drawn out the story. But seeing as there's only 2 volumes with 6 chapters and the series went on hiatus 3 years ago, I am assuming that this will not be completed. Overall, the series gets like a 5 out of 10. It started strong and had real potential, but it was all way too much. Like, I have felt uncomfortable with this series. I felt like interested for the drama. I thought it was just going to be like a very melodramatic series, and then suddenly the second chapter went so far south that I don't know what to feel. I am definitely going to be keeping the first volume because I actually found it really interesting. However, I won't be collecting the second volume, and I'm not likely to read this series again. And I'm not going to keep up with it if it does come out that the mangaka does release another volume. Speaking of volumes, we're going to be talking about Urusei Yatsura Volume 5. Please use your imagination. I know this is Volume 6, but pretend it's Volume 5. Because we have a very, very short summary. The book started off super episodic, which is clearly just some filler stuff, before going into a 4-part story of Lum being tricked into an engagement party with Atere running after her. The Atere being a tsundere over Lum shit, I low-key love. Now, there was more stuff, but I don't remember, and I don't particularly care to remember, because it was mainly just that story of Lum being like engaged, attempted to be engaged off by her dad, and then it not happening. So yeah. And finally, we actually got to read one of the secondhand manga that I bought, this being Orange. Now, I do have to put a major trigger warning for this series for suicide and brief mentions of domestic violence. Now, I want to make it crystal clear, this is a complete spoiler, but the whole plot of this manga is a time travel romance on trying to prevent a character's suicide. This character being one of the main love interests for our protagonist. If that is not to your taste, I 100% understand you not continuing this video, or you skipping ahead. Just be warned, that is the plot of this book. It is preventing a suicide. Now, for the rest of you who have decided to stay, we will be talking about Orange, a time travel romance series with our protagonist, or our main protagonist should I say, Naho, receiving a letter from herself 10 years in the future on her first day of school, or first day back at school, telling her about her new classmate Kakeru and how the version of herself from 10 years in the future and how she wants her to save him. Falling in love with him along the way, and with time jumping between the 26-year-old Naho and the sort of just entire gang of the novel, kind of constantly bouncing between past and present. In general, I love this series so much. Chapter 9 being Kakeru's birthday, and the confession, I keep saying convention, and the confession damn well nearly made me cry. Finding out that Suwa also had a letter was genuinely kind of insane, and also heartbreaking because Suwa was in love with Naho, and 10 years in the future, Suwa is married to Naho and has a child. But also, I love Naho and Kakeru so much. I love Naho and Kakadu. But I also love that Naho follows the letter, and as she follows it, the world progressively changes, and as it turned out, it was not just Sua who had a letter, but the whole gang of characters except for Kakadu. We also get to see the life of Kakadu from the Kakadu's perspective, who passed away in the world of the 10 years in the future gang. Which I found really interesting, but also made me really anxious for what was going to happen in the ending of the story. Speaking on the final chapter, I had thought that the final chapter was a full manga length long, and this was solely because there is no contents page in these books. It's just like the chapters, and that's it. There's no contents page, and it made it so frustrating to read because I didn't know when was like an author's note gonna happen, or when like there was an completely different fucking story that we will talk about later in this volume. Now for the context of the final chapter, it finally honestly made me love Hagita, who is one of the main characters. He is so fucking out of pocket. I honestly love it. He's Psyche K if Psyche was not in fact a psychic and was kind of weirdly human. That is what he feels like to me. In the end, we realize that the future that we've been seeing is an alternate reality from the present day characters that we are seeing from Naho's perspective. And in this reality, Kakadu lives. He's filled in on the story, and the adult versions of his friends send him letters too, which was so fucking cute and actually genuinely made me cry, which was annoying because I had just put in eye drops. But Kakadu in the end is thankful for his friends for saving him and making him realize that he in fact wanted to live. The ending really leaving it up in the air as to if Naho ends up with Kakadu or Sua, with Kakadu and Naho definitively dating at the end of the series, but we have no clue if Kakadu and Naho are dating 10 years in the future or not. In terms of the actual message of the manga, it's very live life without regret and had a very obvious anti-suicide message, showing how one's death can cause an effect on the lives of so many others, so much so that the people around you want to go back in time to see you live. With the author literally making a statement on the final author's note of the volume, reading that if the reader has a Kakadu in their lives, to take care of them as much as they can, and on extension to please take care of yourselves. I also feel super baited that there was a whole other story in this fucking manga that I didn't know about. I really thought we were going to see Kakadu's future. I wanted to see Kakadu's future. I'm going to try and find some fanfiction about this fucking series now. Also, the series personally gets an 8 out of 10 for me. In the end of volume 2 of this series, we have that much of the end of the manga. It was a completely different fucking manga. I feel so baited because I really thought all of that was the ending of the story. That makes me sad. But we're going to be talking about Haruiro Astronaut. I don't know if you can see Haruiro Astronaut. A short romance story inside the likes of Orange, and it did pay off the romance craving and the happy-go-lucky romance craving that I was feeling for this series. So, a short romance story about the twins Mami and Chiki. Mami is the cutest twin who gets all the boys, and Chiki is the motherly figure. Mami is constantly in relationships with boys and breaks up with them so often that it worries Chiki. Chiki can never get a boyfriend of her own, at least one that doesn't treat her like Mami too. So, when Mami ends up dating a guy that Chiki likes, she has to hold back her emotions until two cuties find their own interest in Chiki herself. Mami's boyfriend's childhood best friend Natsuki, and the delinquent type Tatsuaki, both silently fighting for her love. This is a very love me not vibes, in the sense that has way too many love lines going on at the exact same time. but it is super adorable, and I really loved the ending pairing for Cheeky. I thought it was so right and wonderful and fantastic, and wholesome especially, and amazing and adorable, and just the entire book is a really fluffy read, or the entire short story in the book, should I say, is a really fluffy read. If you want a cute shoujo romance, I would definitely recommend Haruiro Astronaut. This gets a solid 8 or 9 out of 10 for me. I think 8.5 personally. So that has been all of my September manga. Now let's get into the Halloween spooky month, being October manga. If you didn't already see my video on it, I accidentally deleted all of my notes on my computer, my phone, and my iPad, because I didn't know that they were all connected and wouldn't be saved to the disk of my computer like I thought they would, because why the fuck would they be taking up space on my computer if they weren't on the disk? That means I have lost all of the data of my anime reviews for October. I'm lucky enough that I recorded in September like I always do, and that I have that footage of those reviews. However, I didn't have footage of any of October yet, and I actually watched a lot in October. So this next bit is going to be mostly improvised from the One Piece live action, Remember, Pompoko, Pokoroso, and Noshiska, Valley of the Wind. That one. That is going to be completely improvised. Any of them afterwards, because I do have a couple more animes that I want to watch this month. Any of them afterwards will be scripted, but those are the ones that I can remember that I watched that I lost the script to. And yeah. October anime, and I am your host, Kurumi. Much like with the cosplay I did a while ago as Cinnamoroll, I have decided to once again cosplay another Sanrio character. This obviously being the creepy queen herself, Kurumi. And I am actually very excited to cosplay her because I've got a bunch of cute accessories and shit. We move on to October anime, as I said. Now, this is, as you will have seen in the previous clip, post me losing all of my notes. So, I do have notes, but they are pretty winged, just by the fact that I was trying to remember everything I wrote down about all of these series. So, I watched quite a bit this month, and that's not even just in anime. I watched like a fair amount of live action movies as well. We're gonna start with something that I mentioned earlier in this video, that being the One Piece live action. So off the bat, I gave this a 7.5 out of 10. So I was one of those bitches originally when it came to One Piece, where I promised myself I would never watch One Piece. And then when the live action was announced, I knew it was either going to be the messiest thing ever because it's One Piece and One Piece fans are nuts. And I became curious also because it was a live action done by Netflix, and Netflix aren't especially well known for their anime adaptations. So I was very, very intrigued, and then I found out that the actual creator of One Piece himself was heavily involved in the actual production side of One Piece. So little by little, I was intrigued to actually watch the series, but the thing that tipped me over the edge was as soon as it came out, my TikTok feed was flooded by buggy thirst traps. This is what my TikTok feed fucking looked like. Ignore the first slide.
Buggy the Clown has taken over TikTok and Tumblr.
All I had wanted to do was to find reviews of this live action and get a gauge of how well it is based on, you know, audience reaction, how much the mangaka was actually involved in the series, that sort of thing. Instead, all I got was buggy. Every single fucking TikTok on my For You page was buggy. And at that point, I hadn't even searched One Piece live action then. It just naturally flooded onto my For You page. The only thing fucking saving me from the flood that was buggy was this snot rag of a cat.
You're dirty. Yes, you are.
My TikTok For You page was solidly buggy and wisp for a week. Anyway, I caved and I watched the series and I watched it with my girlfriend. And I can say that I did enjoy it quite a bit. It reminded me of the first time that I watched the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but, you know, more colourful with more animated characters. And I stand by my vow that I'm not picking up this series as its anime. I'm not touching that fucking anime, but I will possibly read the manga. I'm in the first chapter of the manga, and the chapter count is daunting. I lost all my scripts, so I had gone into a lot of depth about the series, what I thought of the series, and all that sort of stuff. I do not remember my critiques all too well. I had planned to read the manga up until Luffy and the Straw Hats defeat the Fish People gang thing, arc, whatever, but I had a horror list to read. So I'm missing a lot more of my nuanced opinions or my more detailed oriented opinions about the series. Generally, I thought it was pretty good, but I felt like a lot of the characters, or some of the characters, could have been more animated, though Luffy really did make up for a lot of the more serious characters. Characters that I think could have improved their more animatedness was the likes of Zoro. He really could have been more animated, especially since I have seen clips of Zoro since, and he is more animated, as well as Sanji. Sanji really could have been more, personally, but I get that it's an introduction to his character. Still think that, like, the child actor who played Sanji was more animated than Taz himself. And this has influenced me to pick up the One Piece manga once I am finished reading all of my unfinished series that is sitting on this fucking bookshelf right here. We will get to that later. I didn't hate the series overall. Was there a little bit of a lull? Yes, personally, as pirate anime manga, pirate as a genre isn't my favorite unless it's in like fan fiction form. So, yeah, but I did enjoy the series. So I'm sure you will too. And I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Next is another live action that is actually based on a manga that I've talked about in the past, this being Remember, also on Netflix, which for me got a 6.5 out of 10. I believe it was last year where I read the manga of Remember, which actually has an alternative name, that being Karada Sagashi, which I remember I was unable to pronounce very well, and I believe this was in the Weeb-wrap up where I dressed as Waluigi. Again, notes are completely lost, but I remember this decently well. That was a fucking awful wink. So the first half of the film, pretty bland. Very on par with what happens in the manga. However, I believe the scenario itself is a little bit different, as I'm pretty sure in the manga, instead of like the red person being a random schoolgirl or random like elementary school girl, the red person is the classmate of our chosen group, not a random. But I have not read it in a while, and there could be an alternate version of Remember that I just haven't gotten a hold of yet. I was pleasantly surprised to hear Ado had 2 songs featured in this film, Missing and Rebellion. Yes, those have been on my playlist for a fucking while. But back to my opinion. When they're finding the body parts, especially in the first part, I didn't mind the movie as per se, especially when they're showing like a repeating cycle as a montage. I don't mind it, especially with Rebellion playing in the background. What I did mind was the sudden shift they had into like a slice of life style transition, as they can't really do much during the day and they have the cycle go on for so long that they just end up skipping school during the day because it's just one day to them. And these moments where the group bonds feel really artificial at this point in the film. It feels like it should be shown more in the horror aspects than going out and having like slow-mo time in the day-to-day, you know? I wasn't a huge fan of it. But all of this changes when they go to investigate a possible lead into who the red person is during the day. They go to the house where she's murdered, open up a wall, and there is a creepy doll thing that the red person carries around. I believe this doll's name is Emily. Now, this beginning to the sort of part 2 of the movie is very cliche, and the door closing did give me a bit of a jump scare. However, when they get to that night and the red person physically morphs into a deranged monster that fuses with Emily, becoming this huge, disgusting puppet thing, I genuinely had a solid 2 minutes of going, what the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck? Because the puppetry in this film is really good. It's not a CGI villain like you would think something like this would be. It is practical effects, and I was amazed. It legitimately scared the shit out of me, and what made it even better was that it was plot relevant, and that if you got attacked by it and got eaten by it, you got erased. Point blank period, erased. I legitimately had several moments of what the fuck is that thing when I saw it. I wasn't expecting it, nor was I expecting it to clearly be practical effects. While most of the movie does have CGI effects for like the deaths, which look so fucking goofy, the practical effects, especially that of the doll monster, is insane. So good. I fully had the what the fuck is that experience with the monster and all the deaths that it caused. Was there still CGI used on that thing? Yes, but it was predominantly practical effects, which I greatly appreciate, especially in a film like this. And that first image of it on the first night where one of the characters is going missing because she has been eaten really upped the ante on the movie for me. Admittedly, the counterattack with all the characters dying in the process was a little bit too long, but it was clearly there to show off this puppet that they created for the film, which at some points was very reminiscent of the practical effects of The Thing and of that whole 80s time period of practical effects in horror movies. Very, very similar. At one point, its jaw unhinges. Oh my god. Love it. Love it. The ending, where they forget, is a little bit underwhelming and ironic, given the name of the fucking film and series, but I didn't mind it. However, the after credit scene was a little more confusing, and I assume it is a never-ending cycle kind of thing. Last notes would be, if you like horror, you will at first laugh at this film, because it's absurd, it's predictable, that sort of thing. The deaths are so cliche and really goofy. Then, when it comes to the second half of the film, you will really, really appreciate it. It is so good and such a switch up, and one that I really, really appreciate. Then you really, really appreciate it at the introduction of the monster, and then promptly laugh at it again when you see how the monster dies. Jesus fucking Christ. I was also not expecting that one. It wasn't the best plot in terms of the actual plot. It does do the system of Karada Sagashi pretty well. I just think that there was some certain things that really could have been fixed and could have been polished in the film itself, especially with that bonding scene thing. Really didn't feel like it needed to be there. I feel inclined to score this higher than a 6.5 solely for the monster itself, because I really, really, really enjoyed that aspect of the film, but based on the entire film itself, it does get a 6.5 out of 10. It was a little underwhelming, but I cannot get over the mutated monster Emily thing. I really, really liked it. If you have to, if you are a horror buff or really want to see this film, I would absolutely recommend it just for that monster. So the next is a string of Ghibli movies. I was reading a lot of horror manga and needed sort of a palette cleanser for my movies. So for the first time, I watched Pompoko, Poco Rosso, and Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind. Now, I did not end up writing new reviews for this. I wrote one sentence for each Ghibli movie just because I was having a bout of fatigue when this happened. So, Pompoko, I rated 7 out of 10. It was lighthearted and liked it. Why did I need to see their balls? I get it's part of the lore of the actual mythological beings, but why did I need to see their balls? I genuinely thought it was really fun and the environmental message was really sweet. A little bittersweet on how it ended, but that is Ghibli. Next is Poco Rosso. I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. Originally, I actually rated it lower than Pompoko, but for some reason, Poco Rosso stuck with me a lot more, especially with the line, "I'd rather be a pig than a fascist." Now, did I dislike how Poco Rosso was being a pig? Yes. He was making me uncomfortable as hell. I think it stuck with me more because when it comes to Ghibli films, the films that are placed in between real life events, much like Grave of the Fireflies, Poco Rosso is set in between the two world wars, and is set in Italy, in a very, very real place. So I think it hits that hard solely because it is in concept, in terms of place, time, the way it's framed, that sort of stuff. It is similar to Grave of the Fireflies. It is just a completely different aspect to it. I really like how the pirates are in this. I like this more than I thought, probably because my favorite thing about the World Wars was learning about dogfights. And the "I'd rather be a pig than a fascist" stuck in my head. Wasn't a huge fan of the dynamic between the girl and Porco, but generally enjoyed the film itself. Kind of wish they would have explained how Porco turned into a pig. They never explain that. He just sort of does. And only the young girl sees him as a human. Moving on to Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, I gave this a 6 out of 10. It was still very, very enjoyable, but was quintessential hero's journey. If you don't know what the hero's journey is, look at most films that have action in it. Star Wars. Literally, when you're watching Star Wars, pretty much every film is a hero's journey. Nausicaa is very much a classic hero's journey kind of story, with Nausicaa being a little more aware of the world than we know, which is usually not something that I see in Ghibli films. So we're sort of seeing this from the perspective of the other people around her, whereas Nausicaa is a little more tuned into what's going on. But in general, the visuals are fantastic, the sound design is fantastic, especially for it being an older dub where the audio is of slightly lower quality. It's still pretty fucking good. It was very weirdly relaxing, even if it has a very similar vibe to Pompoko, very similar message to Pompoko. It was just less enjoyable solely because it was just a classic hero's journey, and I did kind of just conk out halfway through because I was doing my cosplay for Kobeni at the time. Or I was getting into cosplay for Kobeni. So I did enjoy it. It was very, very pretty. It's Ghibli, of course it was. But I didn't enjoy it as much as Pompoko no Poco Rosso. So moving on, we go into a horror movie, and one that I actually have been meaning to watch for a while, especially since it is one of the most infamous anime movies of all time, this being Akira. Now, I've heard so many references to Akira in video games, in other anime, stuff like that, so it's time for me to actually watch the series itself. I do have some trigger warnings for if you have not watched Akira before and want to look into watching it in the future. There is a trigger warning for violence, body horror, assault, and death. So, what the fuck did I just watch? Genuinely, what the fuck did I just watch? I usually do a synopsis for each series in movies, for each series or movie that I would talk about that I don't want to spoil. But I don't think I can here because the plot was so hard to follow. I kind of just strapped in for the ride half the time and was left with way more answers than I would have liked. So I'm just sort of going to jump into my opinions. First of all, I was disappointed that Akira was the threat and not the name of the main character. I thought it was like Battle Angel Alita kind of thing. No, Akira is the threat in the movie. I did not realize that, and I am very sad. And no, before you ask, I did not watch the English dub. I watched it in subs because I didn't realize the website I was watching it on could have dubs on it. So I did not get the classic
Leave me alone!
Akira!
Also, when I started watching this film, I had an ASMR video playing in the background because I wanted to see if the film worked before watching it. And so just as the explosion went off in the first like minute of the film, there was just a very loud squirt sound that played, and that made me laugh really hard, and I just need you guys to know the mindset I went into this film with. Breaking this up into parts, what did I like story-wise, technically, horror-wise, and overall? Story-wise, it was difficult to follow across the film. I wasn't sure why Kay as a character was required for the film, nor the link between her and the psychic children, nor why her little team exists, nor the connection to Ryu and this like Nezu guy. I was so confused about all of their plot relevance and why he wants the psychic kids as well. Pretty much the only character that got a full story and got full character relevance was Tetsuo, who most of the stuff happens to in the film. And with him being one of the two protagonists, this being Tetsuo and Kanata, it does make sense, but we don't understand nor know pretty much the relevance of any other character in the film other than Tetsuo and sometimes Kanata as well. Also, I think the fact that this takes place in a post-World War III 2019 world is a bit disorienting, especially having watched this in 2023. That'd be like me trying to currently predict 2053. Also, seeing as this place takes place in 2019 and Akira was a child in 1989 along with the other three kids, how old are these children and why are they still fucking children? Also, why do they still have the brains of children? I get that there is a scene where they are physically tested on. How did these people make it so that these psychics stay young just with very old faces? Also, why are they green? Why are they various shades of green and blue? Why? Then of course is the ending. Where did they create a whole new universe, assumedly a parallel one, seeing as all three kids, Akira and Tetsuo, disappear? How did these powers come to fruition in the first place, assuming that it's human testing on these kids? How did it happen? How did Tetsuo running into Takashi, like, on his bike, spark these psychic powers? Kanata is a funny protagonist for the film, and he's kind of the light-hearted one out of the entire film, despite the fact that he is pretty edgy sometimes. But I didn't fully understand his relevance as a protagonist until the very end. Technically, in terms of this film, spectacular. Genuinely, the animation, sound design, even the runtime of the film, amazing. Genuinely. Immediately, it was impressive, and I don't think that's undetested. Personally, I love specifically the lighting of this film, as well as the soundtrack and sound design of the film, and the purposeful uses of silences in tense situations. Generally, I am very big into sound design in films and the aesthetics in films. This one was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and it was also a little uncanny how some of the plot issues are kind of relevant today. Then is the horror-wise. So this one is a bit all over the place. In terms of the climax of the film, it reminded me of two things which were probably inspired by Akira itself. The one, that being the ending to the Demon Slayer manga. If you know the ending of Demon Slayer, you would know that Muzan turns into a giant fucking baby, as did Tetsuo. I guess it's a representation of vulnerability of a villain in the moment, but it's still so bizarre to see. And then number two would be the video game inside. Now, I watched the Game Grumps play this game. At the end, in the final episode of them playing this game, Danny makes a comment that the protagonist turning into that blob of clones is very reminiscent of Akira. I would also say that Inside is very reminiscent of Akira in the way of its plot, theme, and tonal similarities too. It isn't one for one, obviously, but I would say it is pretty similar. But it is uncanny and I can't unthink of it. Body horror wise, I honestly love the trope of psychics just evaporating people once their powers get like super out of control and just bapping them out of existence like that. I thought it was fantastic when Tetsuo did it. It honestly never fails to impress me and also get a small chuckle out of me in the way that it happens. Also, what do you mean they shot him with a fucking satellite? They shot Tetsuo with a fucking satellite to neutralize him. What the fuck? Overall, I liked it. I think it did drag a bit and the plot was a bit hard to follow, but it was enjoyable enough. It was technically gorgeous, and despite being horror, was very appealing on the eyes. And the plot in general just goes to show this is what happens when you give an edgy teenager psychic powers that he can't control. It wasn't the worst. I just feel like it either needed to speed up on the relevance of plot points or could have added more. Assuming this was going to be in multiple parts, it makes sense why it was played out the way it did, but as it stands currently, it feels like the Avatar movies of anime. Technically impressive, but with a plot that drags and sometimes is hard to follow, making you feel like you're being dragged by it. Too long runtime, but with characters that you do get to know, mostly our protagonist and the like to some degree. 7 out of 10. It didn't move me, but I can see why it's so well renowned, and I am incredibly impressed by the visuals and production elements of this film. I will be reading the manga of Akira eventually, I hope at least, just so I can get a little more information on what the fuck was supposed to be happening, but yeah. Next is our two completely line-sided entries onto this list. One being Yamishibai Season 11, that I had no clue was releasing this year. If you didn't know, earlier this year I reviewed 10 seasons of Yamishibai thinking that there was only 10 seasons of Yamishibai. Recently, the 11th season of Yamishibai concluded. And this was the last thing I expected to go onto my review list. But the way that this happened was because I lost my anime list for this year, I decided to go through all of the Weeb wrap-ups from this year specifically and write down all the anime that I watched, putting them onto a list to put onto my anime list directly. And when I got to Yamishibai, you scroll down to sort of see what seasons come next. And under season 10, there was a sequel. Usually there isn't a sequel if there's no sequel to that season. So I clicked on it thinking, oh, a new season of Yamishibai is coming up, only to find that it only had recently just finished airing. Let's talk about another 13 episodes of Yamishibai. Honestly, this season was really good. And this might be a bit biased, seeing as I didn't have to sit through another 9 seasons of Yamishibai in one sitting, but this season was actually really good. Pretty on par with season 2 or 3, with a constantly shifting art style, but the stories themselves were pretty good. They didn't feel stale or overdone. They do still depend on jump scares a lot and partially unfinished stories, but they're not leaning into sad stories predominantly anymore and have returned to the original formula of the second season of Yamishibai. And I loved it. Genuinely loved it. Still very Grizzly Tales-esque in their format, but that's just the show's format in general. Some of the standouts of this season include the Mother's Freakout in episode 2, loved it. The art style of episode 11, it was so different from the rest of the series, and I really would have liked to see just an entire season of Yamishibai in that particular art style. I thought it was so fucking cool. I thought episode 12 was a little bit funny because they just really went, yeah! Multiple times in that one episode, and the final episode of the season is the only sad episode, and I actually really liked it. Out of 13 episodes, I found myself only lost on one episode, that being episode 6. And for a last minute addition to my horror list for this month, and especially one that came out this season, I really liked it. I give this one a 7 out of 10, which is surprising. Overall, the entire series still gets like a 6 out of 10 for me, but this one is better than a lot of them at the moment. And speaking of things that I didn't expect to put on this fucking list, I found out where I can actually watch the free movies and where I could find the full version of the free Take Your Marks series. Free Take Your Marks. Much like Yamishibai, me finally getting to watch all of Free Take Your Marks wasn't on my list of things that I wanted to watch this month. Before we begin, I have watched the first 2 episodes of this mini-series before. This is sort of like a prelude to season 3 and a prologue of season 2, but involving the characters of season 3, and you will have had to have watched High Speed at this point, which is really annoying still. I still don't like the characters of Ikuya and Asahi. I have watched the first 2 episodes, but I've only seen clips of the second 2, definitely never having seen the 4th episode. And honestly, it was really fun to watch. Unlike the 3rd season of Free, Take Your Marks was super fun and it brought up the most random topics that answer questions about the behind the scenes stuff as that you as an audience wouldn't really ask. Like, who's a better driver? Rin? Haru? Makoto? The answer? Not Sasuke. He will get us fucking lost. Anyway, the miniseries is slightly more silly than the series itself. Way less silly than the Eternal Summer OVA, which in the chronological timeline of the series directly predates this miniseries. So the way you'd have it, it would be High Speed, Season 1, Season 2, Season 2's OVA, Take Your Marks, Season 3, and then the 2 films. Which, that sudden switch up of the OVA to the miniseries is really funny to me, as this was Definitely a pre-season release of season 3 and post High Speed, rather than a continuation after season 2, which I'm not mad at having seen season 3, but I kind of wish it was closer in tone to Eternal Summer, because preference. Now, for some personal moments for episode 3 and 4, seeing as they were more of a first watch for me. In episode 3, I was so sad that the film that the Iwatobi Swim Club was filming was not splashed free. It's all of the like costumes and set pieces and it's not splash free. I cry every time, especially since they tried to put Makoto in Rin's position, and I'm just like that would have been such a good callback. But no, it was still a good callback, but it would have been an amazing one. The subs, while I was watching the series, kept cutting out, and this was the same for all 4 episodes. So I was missing a fair amount of context for certain scenes, leaving me to try and fill in the context, or fill in the blanks, which most of the missing subs was usually people saying like doseru or doseru no, something along those lines, which roughly translates to what should we do, which makes a lot of sense. Don't say anime doesn't teach you things. Episode 4. So, the miscommunication trope. I loved it in this episode, but it was so fucking funny to watch and also really frustrating because it was Rin versus Momo. Rin thought Momo was trying to go on dates with his sister. Momo wanted a toy that Rin had. Somehow Haru got thrown into the mix and thought Rin was quitting swimming again. Messy. I love it. It was so funny, and genuinely the one who set everything together, set everything straight, was Haru, which is so ironic because he was so very gay in this one. I will not elaborate. So, having already watched half the series, I found the 4 episodes really, really enjoyable, if not a little annoying at some points. The more I saw Rin, the happier I was. It's my man. It's my man. He's been my man since I was 14 anyway. And I really wanted the series to dip away from season 3 characters. They didn't show up a lot, but they did show up a bit. And they did somewhat force them in as cameos into the story. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The characters of season 3 made Sosuke likable. I did not like Sosuke before season 3. In fact, I had a love-hate relationship with Sosuke prior to season 3. He is now one of the good ones. I very much dislike Ikuya and Asahi. Let's see if the 2 movies change that, though I haven't watched them this month. Sometimes I wish for the days where I was a season 1 purist and really, really disliked Sosuke and Momo. Generally, I enjoyed Take Your Marks. I gave this one a 6.5 out of 10. And that is all of my anime for October. So, now let's move into October manga, where I have all of my notes and read a fuck ton this month. So, let's get into it. Some of these I read in paperback form, some of these I read in physical form, and I have so much manga that I still need to read that I purchased. We're going to actually start with probably the first thing that I read on the first day of October. This being The Strange Tale of Panorama Island. This being from the horror list and was picked from MangaTube specifically, and that I was very excited to read. This one was like about a full volume's length, so I'd say maybe the length of Black Paradox, and I read this on the Internet Archive because apparently the Internet Archive has fucking manga on it. This story in general feels like a story that I have read before. Very Ito and Umez in style, especially in the way that the story ends. This is set in the 1920s. The story is that of Hitomi Hirosuke, a down-on-his-luck author trying to get his work published. Upon meeting one day with his editor, he is informed that the man that was almost a brother to him, mainly because they looked alike, mainly because they looked identical, has passed away, and this man was very, very rich. Rich, you know? Hitomi, wishing for the places in his book to become real, fakes his death and becomes, this is a hard name, Genzaburo Komodo Reborn for his own gains. Throughout the story, Hitomi manipulates those around him and he creates Panorama Island, an amusement park for the pleasures of adults and life. Or rather, an island made like an actual panorama and made to be a utopic island of orgies and fun and frolicking nude. When Komodo's wife becomes suspicious of Hitomi, he kills her. Straight up, he kills her. And very quickly, people noticed, specifically people on the island. Not that they cared, they were too busy having orgies. But Komodo's wife's family cared and got a detective, Akechi, on the case. In the final chapter, Hitomi's utopia gets found out for what it truly is by Detective Akechi. After being found out, Hitomi admits the whole story and asks Akechi if he can get his affairs together before going to prison. A great buzzing light is shown in the sky and a boom can be heard and seen throughout the island. Blood rain shines down and pieces of flesh fall to the ground. Hitomi Hirosuke, having been found out, takes his own life for real this time, leaving parts of himself scattered around the island. So this was recommended to me via MangaTube and it's a very nice horror, not particularly gory, more psychological, and leaves a lot to the imagination but also spells it out pretty graphically for you. There is a lot of literary references with Hirosuke being an author, but you don't understand them all. If you don't understand them all, then it doesn't particularly matter. I didn't understand most of them, except for the ones referencing Edgar Allan Poe. The aesthetics of Panorama Island is very 1920s post-colonial ideals of utopia, as well as 17 to 1800s colonial depictions of the architecture and cultural imagery and dresses of countries such as India, Indonesia, and Thailand. I'm probably missing more, but those are the main ones that I could identify. And with the whole point of Hitomi stealing Komodo's wealth, a lot of Western influences can be shown, and I see a lot, particularly in Panorama Island. I don't know why, but it's very specifically what the series reminds me of. Speaking of, I do like that when Panorama Island is shown, in most cases, it's shown as an actual like panoramic image in the actual book itself. It is a very nice touch that the artists include. Overall, it's a pretty good story and ended up with one hell of a bang. But not the most impactful horror story that I have seen, but it really is really built up to a solid ending. I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Next one is also from the horror pick list, very short, off of MangaTube, and the concept made me somewhat excited to read this, though the aesthetics not so much. This being Final Girl. So this is the shortest story from my horror list. Having read a review of the story, I was interested to read it, but seeing the cover, I was scared. This story is a one-shot basically akin to an isekai version of Scary Movie, where the main character gets turned into a girl that usually gets killed first in a horror movie, and he's literally in a movie. Before getting isekai'd, he'd been reading a list on how not to die in a scary movie, and guess what? He's now in a scary movie, this being our protagonist. Shenanigans ensue. The movie essentially is Friday the 13th, but in end, he, as the main girl, gets to leave with the final girl, and the cycle starts again. Generally, the story was fine. It was a little disappointing, as it is just an isekai parody, and a parody of a horror movie, and horror movie tropes in general, which has been done to death before, and done in thriller at that. The purpose of the story really felt like it was just to get a hot girl to be victorious in a horror movie, but she's not actually a girl, so it's really, really cheap. It's a short series, so short review. This gets a 5 out of 10 for me. Moving away for horror for a second, we have My Love Mix-Up Volume 8. I told you this was coming back. This volume was so cute. So in this volume, we're back from Kyoto, and as we are back, we see Aoki as his fully flustered self again, but in the context of Ida flustering him by becoming more bold with his actions, aka kissing him out of nowhere. I loved it. Finally, in the lovey-dovey stage, if not, Ida definitely is, and it's emphasized by the fact that we see a lot more of a casual Ida in this volume. I'm pretty sure there's only one volume left of this series, and it's so adorable, and I'm so happy that I picked up this book. It's so cute and adorable. I don't want to spoil this volume too much, but I will say the artist themselves says that this volume and volume 7, Ida and Aoki are supposed to be looking at each other in terms of like the covers of the like 2 volumes. So cute. I will be displaying these 2 together like this. Fuck it, no I won't, but I want to. I love it so much, and I cannot wait for the final volume, which I think comes out in December. And back onto the horror list, we have Fukuju Toshi, chapters 1 through 3. So, this was once again off the horror list. It was short for what was available. There's supposed to be a lot more chapters and a lot more volumes, but I could not access it. I could only access the first 3 chapters. Not that I would continue past chapter 5 if I got up to chapter 5, because oh my god, I think I need to make a list of shonen horror and just put them, rate them on a scale from Green Worlds to Attack on Titan. I don't fucking know. I'm tired of shonen horror. Especially shonen horror that has a male protagonist become what he swears to destroy. It's been done to death, and Fukuju Toshi is one of those series. Now, I couldn't do my 5 chapter rule, as I said, because I am missing 2 chapters. I can only access 3 chapters. There seems to be only 3 chapters translated online. Here is what I could grasp from the first 3 chapters of the series. Kyo is our jaded to the world protagonist who has no purpose prior to the start of this series, and reminisces on a character on a cheap-ass t-shirt he's forced to wear as a part of a punishment game back when he was glitter-eyed to the world. After getting changed in the bathroom with his friend, they notice a sudden massacre has occurred outside while Kyo's gotten changed, and they didn't hear any carnage or screaming whatsoever, and the effects of what caused the massacre didn't occur in the bathroom. Surprise, surprise. But suddenly, Kyo's friend's clothes, the one who was in the bathroom with him, start moving on their own, and another one of their friends runs up to them because they were in a group of 4 when this happened. His shirt turns into a monster and eats her. Kyo and the 4th female friend, that's important, run away from the death and try to escape the scene when her clothes start to move. I think you've seen where this is going. And the only logical solution clearly is to strip her and her bra from her too, even though it wasn't moving, it was just her blouse. Something that she points out. In trying to run away, they find that the massacre is also happening outside, and since they're in Shinjuku, there are a lot of people everywhere. They hear police are there too and try to run away, only to find that there's a force field of thread in their way. Kyo is then swarmed and transforms, kills all his attackers, and then when he comes to, he has no clue what happened. Doesn't that sound fucking familiar? This feels way too much like AOT meets the Undead Messiah, and a hint of Green Worlds as well. Also, of course, the shy teenage girl had to be stripped. Of course, Kyo couldn't give her back her bra. Of course, he couldn't give her the shirt he'd been previously wearing before changing into the shirt that he wore for a punishment game. It is one of those manga. The ones that I fucking hate. The concept is overdone, and despite being a unique monster type, it's not interesting, cause it feels like I was just rereading the start of Green Worlds again. Also, the digital blending of the monsters and the inking was a little too weird for me and just wasn't clean. This gets a 4 out of 10 for me. Moving on to another horror suggestion. This was $120 to get these 3 volumes. And that was on the cheap end. This is Octopus Girl, volumes 1 through 3, the complete series. Now, I said I watched, or read, should I say, The Strange Tale of Panorama Island on the Internet Archive. Octopus Girl is also on the Internet Archive, but only volume 3. So I had to try and find Octopus Girl anywhere, and it's really hard to find scans of this on the internet, so I went onto eBay to try and find it, only to find that it is a rare out-of-print book that people are selling for upwards of $300. Someone tried to get me to buy these books, and they were selling it for $350 USD. They kept knocking down the price, but babe, I am not paying that much to read a manga that I'm not all that interested in just for a video. And we'll get into my opinions on this, but the person that I bought this from, I'm so glad that they went down to $120, because that was my offer to them. These were originally $170, not including shipping. I paid $133 for this. So I had high expectations for this book. These are mediocre. So let's get into this review. Octopus Girl. So this series is by Toru Yamazaki. It's out of print, as I said, and I've heard good things about Toru Yamazaki, so I figured I would want his series as well, at least to read them. I kind of wish I had just read volume 3 on the Internet Archive, and that was it. With some impressive visuals of horror, the series is generally a vulgar comedy, which is not to my stylings whatsoever. It's like a more vulgar version of Soichi's Tales from Junji Ito. The story surrounds Takako, which her name is a pun on octopus, thus Octopus Girl. A girl who in the first volume was just an innocent goody two-shoes bullied horribly by 3 girls in her class. I thought it was starting off solid with this plot, and the fact that the first instant of a girl jumping in this manga, there wasn't a panty shot. Bare minimum. Very surprising, which it really shouldn't be. Until, of course, Takako's instant transformation into a half octopus creature, which she assumes her transformation is because of her bullies, and just suddenly murks them all. And her life as an octopus, she quickly becomes accustomed to, which is very strange. To which several chapters later, she meets a half eel girl and they become friends. Now, each story feels like its own one-shot, but each chapter kind of like threads together and blends kind of really well, making an actual story. However, with what this plot started out of, it was pretty disappointing with what it turned into. Most of the chapters, especially in volume 2, are just our 2 girls getting part-time jobs. And then wherever they go, chaos ensues. To put it simply, what I liked in this series was the images of gore. Toru Yamazaki actually draws gore really, really well. Some of the monsters and single panels are done super well and are, well, pretty good. But tonally, because this author kind of really fucking likes gross out humor, it gets flattened so quickly or shows up at really weird timings. And some of the moments are pretty funny, but I'm not the biggest fan of horror comedies, especially horror comedies with shit and piss humor. That is a lot of what this is. Also, one thing that does get a positive note for me is that the short stories at the end of each novel, Yamazaki is really good at short horror. So in each of these books, you would have maybe that much of the actual story and this much of any extra shorts or horror shorts. And Yamazaki does them so well. So well. They are, the short stories at the end of each novel are fantastic. They are actually usually have happy endings, which you don't tend to see, and they're really nice as opposed to the rest of these fucking stories. Anyway, Yamazaki is really good at horror shorts. From the ghost faces to just short, sad horrors. Like a mother not realizing she's dying. It was nice. What I think could improve the plot. 100%. There was a lot that could have been done plot-wise, especially from the beginning, but was thrown away for a joke or to punish its characters, which I've mentioned in previous reviews I fucking hate. Now, you can tell me that the same thing happens to Soichi, but the difference mainly is that Soichi is an enjoyable character. These girls aren't really. I dislike this trope more because these characters are teen girls, 15 and 18 respectively, and I felt like more could have been done with their characters. Now that being said, they are a lot like Soichi. Same shit happens to him, but the difference is that Tatako and Takake have really shit personalities, which devolve more and more from the first chapters. And then there's the fact that while I applaud the series for doing the bare minimum and not doing too many panty shots, because after that first one there was 1 or 2 panty shots, not even 1 or 2, there is still a lot of nudity in these novels. Again, these characters are 15 and 18 respectively. From our protagonists especially, these two, their only goals in life is to be housewives, which isn't a bad thing, but for their characters with extremely unlikable personalities, it feels so very two-dimensional. The short stories do something that I don't see often in the horror sphere specifically, and that's have horror stories with happy endings, where the monster is liked by everyone, and I think that's why I like the shorter stories over the main story of Octopus Girl. Artistically, these stories are pretty damn good, but the plot lacks a lot of what I am looking for in horror, and in this case, artistic ability cannot make up for my personal flaws with these novels. And it was a little underwhelming in my opinion. It's very lukewarm, and mainly because of shorts, this gets a 6 out of 10. I will be keeping these. Seeing as I spent $120 on them, on 3 books that when published probably would have cost $15 each max, and that is me being liberal with them. Next we have Scarlet, which is short from the horror list again, also from MangaTube, and this one is ecchi. I was not originally going to talk about this because it is labeled ecchi, and I made a personal rule to myself that I would not talk about any ecchi on my channel, no matter how good the plot is, simply because of the other plot that's unavoidable. And when it comes to ecchi, reviewing plot while ignoring the lewd is pretty impossible, seeing as most of the time it's not just the romantic relationship, it's the sexual element will be pretty heavily intertwined with the main plot of the story itself and the main element of the story. I changed my mind with this story clearly, as you are hearing this part, and I have to make a caveat that this is an ecchi manga. It is also a Yuri ecchi manga, but there are some uncomfortable elements. This is the story of Fine and Iris, a werewolf vampire creature and an actual werewolf. These two are bound to each other by a promise of Iris eating Fine's body once she is human again. And I don't mean in a sexual way, I mean literally. Fine is a part of an organization known as Leah, where they take down werewolves and stop the use of the drug elixir, which turns people into werewolves. Her goal is to get to the person making elixir, the true wolf, who in dying will free Fine from her curse. Now, as of note, this is a completed series, solely because the manga got cancelled before its prime. It was setting up itself to be a really good story, similar to the likes of Black Butler, but with an age-appropriate, assumedly main character. There does seem to be an age difference, but with Iris being a supernatural being, I am not so sure about the age thing, and I'm gonna turn a blind eye because they never say ages in this story. But there was one thing in the story that I could not turn a blind eye to, and that was the succubus character was in a child body. Now, the succubus character doesn't do anything physically or has anything done to them physically. They also dressed in Lolita clothing. That was weird. And the most sexual thing done with this character is that there is adult naked women around them. Completely adult. They don't touch her. I think they make out at one point, but it's just like a singular frame. That was uncomfortable. But luckily, there is no sex with this character. Thank fuck. Just one or two very suggestive panels with these adult women. Generally, I really like the story. The vampire-esque werewolf romance, the start of a clearly grandiose plot that I wish could have flourished. And yes, chapter 7 being just a solid sex chapter was pleasantly surprising. Since until that point, I was convinced that this was just a lewd series. Also, I forgot that the dynamic duo is together because Fine will go crazy if she doesn't suck Iris's blood. And it's always very intimate when it happens, thus why I assumed most of the ecchi in this was just lewd and that, but no, there's an actual proper sex scene chapter even. Unfortunately, this was rushed because it was cancelled, so we got a brief glimpse at a potential end to the actual series if it had continued and flourished. In terms of horror, I think I'm desensitized to horror because the only horror that was in it was violence and a little bit of gore. It was way more romantic and lewd than horrific, except for the fact that there was the succubus in the child body. That was pretty fucking horrific. But other than that, I liked it. I really wish it had gotten its time to develop into a proper series. It's an awesome vampiric werewolf romance, and if you're okay with ecchi, then I would recommend it. 7.5 out of 10. Next on to more horror and more shonen horror. I should just remove every single shonen horror that's on this fucking list. This was short. This was one of the shorter series. That's why I fucking have it on here. A plain hikikomori is the last person on Earth, gets possessed by his half-sister, and becomes super OP, finding out that he's kind of human, and the love interest is a lolly. This concept has been done so many times before. And yes, this is shonen horror. It is the same formula as shonen horror. However, this is kind of the worst one because it's just hard to read due to the sheer amount of telling and not showing. The alien species tells us everything and doesn't show it for us to see. These sentiments of the protagonist being a human get hammered in, and on top of that, it is a boring concept. None of the characters are connectable and have no true heart. The characters that did, we had for less than 2 chapters to get to know, and that is a lolly that has nothing. Who the protagonist ends up kissing, which is viscerally uncomfortable because the character is visibly smaller and younger than the protagonist. 2 of 10. Not worth the read for the pure mediocrity of the actual series itself. This series also got cancelled, much like Scarlet, and I'm glad it did because it would have been a mind-numbing read. Now we get to move on to my favourite horror, Junji Ito. So Black Paradox, I was supposed to buy a story for my girlfriend that I couldn't find, so instead I bought myself 2 books. We'll talk about this one later. Black Paradox, so trigger warning for this: attempted suicide, attempted group suicide, and as always, general body horror. This is Junji Ito. Surprisingly, this was not on my horror list, as I don't tend to put Junji Ito on my horror list, but it would not be October without me reading Junji Ito. So, Black Paradox. This is a story of 4 people who met on a website called Black Paradox to all kill themselves as a part of a group. We have Maruso, who is plagued with anxiety, Barachi, who hates her appearance due to a birthmark. We have Pitan, who feels inferior to a robot made in his image, and we have Taburo, who keeps seeing a doppelganger. Each chapter is weirder than the last, with Maruso meeting the doppelgangers of the people she's supposed to kill herself with, eventually defeating them and meeting up with the real deal. They try to take sleeping pills when Pitan dies, and his body swells with all of these mysterious pearls, known in the series as Paradonite. The souls of the people of the world in shiny spherical form, which can power anything and everything and glows so beautifully. Slowly, each member of the Black Paradox group have their greatest reason for killing themselves be the portal to paradise, where these pearls are stored. With the help of a doctor, Dr. Sugar, taking advantage of each person and becomes the ringmaster for distributing the Paradonite. The story ends with the group looking into the future, especially that of Dr. Sugar, and in the end continuing the Black Paradox project for the betterment of humanity, even if it means people losing their souls and disappearing forever. I actually really liked this way more than I thought I would. It wasn't the most horrific like other Junji Ito stories, but it was definitely really interesting and worth reading. Kinda just for the characters and the plot. It's definitely not the most captivating story, but for like the short one-shot stories that we've been getting recently, it's definitely the most captivating. And I like this significantly more than I like Censor, and it's investing enough to where I'm not dozing off or losing my mind somewhere else when reading this. Unlike how I have felt in some of the other Ito stories, it's perfectly average for Ito, and I actually like it a fair amount. 8 out of 10. Especially compared to the last fucking one. Now, I believe I have 2 more from the horror list, so let's just jump into Kiriko. This is probably one of the shorter series from my list, and I was very, very excited to read this one. Take the premise from Pumpkin Night and Remember, of a schoolgirl in a group of classmates turning into a monster after her death or subsequent suicide, and you have the premise of Kiriko. And unlike the done-to-death formula of shonen horror, I actually don't mind the repeating theme of these kinds of horror stories solely because these kinds of horror stories are either A, unique to one another, or B, the goriest things you can ever imagine, and occasionally C, short. So I'm not reading 80 chapters of the same mind-numbing fucking plot, and it actually properly develops. And I'm not flashed or forced to witness a teenager being stripped just because. Kiriko is in concept similar to both Remember and Pumpkin Night. However, 17 years after her death, her 6 classmates have a class reunion at their school on the date of her death, all being sent an invite from the mysterious K. One by one, they get picked off by the girl's ghost-transformed monster in progressively gruesome ways, with the rest having to find a way to escape the school and Kiriko. And I really like this story, not only because of some of the visuals that are fantastic, especially of Kiriko herself, but also because this is genuinely really funny. And not intentionally funny, but like funny in a way that you would watch and commentate on an old horror movie with like a friend or something like that. Think how I tore apart Green Worlds, but instead of me really disliking the plot or thinking that it's super boring, I actually like the plot of this story. For example, the deaths of one of the characters, Masao. Masao in general has some stupid one-liners that I thought were kind of funny, but the way he dies is so fucking comical. He finds Kiriko in the music room playing the piano, and for context, he is a musician. He starts playing along with his guitar and singing. The next thing we see is Kiriko standing above him, and he asks, "Since when did you get so big?" The next thing we know, there is a rod through his face and his body is mangled inside the piano. The rod through the face was fucking personal. As well as the bitch slap of death to the person who summoned everyone to the school in the first place. Deserved. Speaking of Kiriko's height, every time she kills, she gets bigger. And not only bigger, I mean like taller, and especially more grotesque. And while her appearance isn't the most disgusting, I grew up in like the Slender Man era, the way that she moves in this manga is horrifying. From a scene where 2 characters are having an argument and you can see her silhouette coming up in the window, to her head scraping against the roof of the hallways, to her eventually being so big that she bursts out of the school in a very Attack on Titan fashion. It's all really effective, and that is probably the most horrifying. Not her appearance, but just the way she moves, especially when she starts running on all 4s, which is saying a lot, as this is manga and characters don't fucking move actually. I also love that the story actually puts you on Kiriko's side, not by necessarily hating on the main characters, but rather A, on the humorous side, but B, the way that they show her backstory and reveal her death. And it explains why she looks a certain way in her monster form. Then of course is the ending, which is left up to interpretation of whether the protagonist got out alive or not, or if Kiriko made her own personal world for him. Personally, I took it as she's always watching him, but that is up to you. I personally gave this a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed it, but it did have its obvious flaws. Then, for the last entry from my horror list for this month, we have Downfall. This is a horror list, this is short, and I had wanted to read this prior to actually fucking reading it. I don't know how this ended up on my horror list when this is in fact a drama, and a depressing one at that, and quite gross as well. I'm also annoyed because I'd been excited to read this one, having had it on my to buy list for a while. I now no longer have it on that list, nor do I really have that list because of the Great Note Deletion event of 2023, which makes me even more frustrated at this manga, but also slightly grateful because this was the review I was writing when the Great Deletion event of 2023 happened. So this kind of saved my manga list. As plainly as possible, I didn't like it. Pretty much after the notes deletion thing, I didn't really want to write this review anymore, so this is the simplest way I can put this. As plainly as possible, I didn't like it. It's a self-loathing narcissist who who can't look outside of himself and blames everyone else for his misfortune. And he just gets a little bit of writer's block as well. This has sex in it. This has essay in it, pretty graphic essay as well. I wouldn't recommend it because while it's depressing, it's not depressing in a moving way. It's just depressing. This gets a 4 out of 10. The art style was nice and I appreciate this review being the one that saved the script. Finally, we move on to Look Back. Now this is by Tatsuki Fujimoto, the same creator of Chainsaw Man. I have reviewed 2224 and 1721 by him before as well. I've read Chainsaw Man, reviewed that obviously, and I've been seeing a lot of good things about Look Back. Now, I do have to mention, trigger warning for mention of death and massacre. I only say that because this isn't horror. I only typically put trigger warnings on anything that I think is really, really graphic or anything that isn't obviously horror, unless there is something very specific that I think could trigger people. Even then, I don't do my due diligence half the time as well. I will usually put it on screen in post, but Look Back is a slice of life. From Tatsuki Fujimoto, Look Back is honestly a somber tale of two kids who want to make manga, dealing with the loss of someone who is important, especially someone you start a journey with. I don't want to spoil it too much, especially since it is this short, but it surprised me that this was a manga from Fujimoto with how slice of life it was and how sad it was. And the back in time parallel world aspect in the conclusion, I surprisingly really liked. It didn't retcon anything, but it was welcomed, I guess. I would definitely suggest this even if you don't like Fujimoto's other works. Generally, I gave it a 9 out of 10. I thought this was really great, especially for a one-shot. And that is all my manga. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this pretty long edition of the Weeb-wrap up, and I hope you guys enjoyed my outfit, even though I had to cover up, and I will see you guys next time. My next Weeb-wrap up will be the November-December on December 31st. I will be putting out a mega compilation before that, which will probably just be up to October, but we will see. We will see. And I will see you guys next time. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!